I wanted to do a video about the death of handhelds ever since a YouTuber called RGT85 did a video a few weeks ago on it. I wanted to do the video because about a month ago I played through a game called Hyperdimension Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters, which did give me a few good video ideas. Not exactly what I would call a really great game, but it does give me quite a few good video ideas, especially with the amount of airplane humor that game had. But with the characters in the game meant to represent handheld gaming, and having them being knocked a few steps out of time due to an accident, and having them to experience the modern gaming with mobile devices being in the head when it comes to portable gaming, it was a clever way of acknowledging that handhelds are dead and gaming has changed, but at the same time acknowledging that it wasn't the smartphone that killed handheld gaming. Now, don't get me wrong, the smartphones did come in and do damage to the handheld video game, knocking Nintendo's lead from 150 million DS units sold to just 75 million 3DS units sold. But 75 million 3DSs, that's not dead. It's still quite a bit more than the Xbox One, and running close to the PS3, which although a drop in the PlayStation brand, it wasn't considered a failure. Also, I think mobile gaming and handheld gaming, at least when it came to the Vita and 3DS, are for different audiences. Mobile has two audiences for the people who play them. For people like me, we use it just to kill 5 minutes at the doctor's office and want a quick game of something, but we're not going to pick it up at home. And the others are oftentimes super casual games who may only want one thing to keep them occupied, and they want a game to be simple. Handheld gamers are oftentimes more in line with regular console gamers and PC gamers. They want something to be played while we are gone, but we want to take them home and continue playing it. We want to be engaged, and we really just want to pay for the game once. And that had been what it was between the time of the year 2000 and about 2020. Let's take a look at the history of mobile games and what's changed in the last couple of years. But before we do that, if you're enjoying this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Okay, so the handheld gaming started way back in the 80s, and at the time it was simple LCD games that you got with the Game & Watch. Later, Nintendo would create the Game Boy, and although it wasn't the first portable console like it, or even the most impressive console at its time, it was, however, the most successful. Nintendo did not throw in a backlight, and it did not have a color screen. However, because Nintendo decided not to do those things, rather than having to charge $500 for the Game Boy in 1980s money and having a battery life that would only last an hour, they would charge less than $100 for it, and the battery life could last several hours, making it way more convenient for what it's supposed to do than its competition. While the Game Boy was successful, it really wasn't considered its own thing by console gamers. And if you kind of think about it, there's not a lot of talk when it comes to classic games about Game Boy games when you reach outside of a few Mario and Pokemon games, and that's one of the reasons why. And then we got into the Game Boy Advance era, and that's where everything changed, and people kind of saw the handheld gaming as legitimate gaming and kind of like a cheaper second console that you could take on the go. The Game Boy Advance could do graphics that were on par, if not better, than the Super Nintendo, and you had really great games in their software like the Mega Man Zero series, or what Koji Igarashi did with the Castlevania series on the Game Boy Advance. These were classic, and they weren't just games you played on the road, you popped them in at home too. Hell, the reason why I bought my GameCube and the disc I had in my GameCube 99% of the time was the Game Boy player. Game Boy Advance games are still huge, and both Capcom, Nintendo, and Konami are releasing these games in bundles or on the Nintendo Online service, so it's still big and people are willing to pay premium prices for them. Then came the Nintendo DS, which was also impressive, but did things in its own way with the touchscreen, which could appeal to new audience who may be looking for a more casual experience. However, unlike the Wii, game developers could still do traditional games on that too. It was just a matter of what you wanted to do with that second screen. And oftentimes, when it came to more traditional games, what they did was put in things like the map or status screen, something that you would normally have to pause the game in order to see. With that second screen, it was very easy just to keep the game action going. It was a genius move by Nintendo, and it took off probably one of their most successful consoles ever. So what happened? Well, remember what I did say at the beginning of the video about smartphones taking half of the DS audience? Well, a few years into the Nintendo DS, the iPhone came out, and smartphones kind of became the thing. And I remember when the 3DS and Vita came out that a lot of people would saying that they would be dead on arrival. Who's going to pay $20 to $50 for a game when you can just buy a 99 cents to $5 and play it on your phone, which you'll always have with you? And I do believe those super casual base that Nintendo 20 years ago was chasing did go to the iPhone. It's why we got that 50% drop in the 3DS sales. But that's not what killed Handheld. That kind of talk kind of went the way of the dodo when two things happened to smartphone games. First, there wasn't much content control, not like we got with the console games. It's definitely not what we would got with the Nintendo and Sony consoles, and so there was a lot of shovelware. Second thing, most games in the mobile market aren't going to charge you that 99 cents or a couple of dollars for a simple game, like people were expecting would happen. No, 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 no. These games all went free to play, or I do like how Satoru Iwata kind of criticized this tactic. They're free to start, but you'd have to be nickeled and dimed at every opportunity in order to really enjoy them. Older console gamers like myself hate this with a freaking passion, and it's why a lot of us don't really consider mobile gaming to be real gaming. Even though there are quite a few games I do enjoy on my smartphone, yeah, I don't consider them in the same league as my PC or my console games like the Switch. So if the handheld market was different and still pulling in decent numbers at 75 million, why did Nintendo discontinue their handheld systems? And why did the Sony discontinue their Vita? Well, the answer isn't that the smartphones came along and killed the market. The answer is actually the graphical bottleneck, or to put as some gamers say, it was the fact that there's now a diminishing returns on consoles and graphics when you get a new console with more horsepower. What made Nintendo's handhelds so successful is they were oftentimes underpowered compared to the hardware that was available. Because of that, they could sell them cheap, less than $100 for the original Game Boy, $120 for the Game Boy Advance, only $150 for the Nintendo DS, and $200 for the 3DS. When the game consoles of their time usually cost over twice as much, it really was a win for Nintendo, and people could see this as a secondary console. And because they were kind of less powered, game developers oftentimes made games exclusive to the Game Boy Advance and 3DS, and with these games being so high quality, you can understand why they were successful. And because they were at least 2 console generations behind, you got a different game and gaming experience that you would get from a console. Not necessarily worse, just a different one. A lot of developers use this as an opportunity to move some of their older franchises to these handhelds so they wouldn't have to make the big changes or put in the budgets needed to make modern console gamers. Two of my favorite game franchises as a kid had their last big hurrahs more on the portable game consoles than they did on actual regular consoles, and that would be Mega Man and the classic Castlevania game series. But now being underpowered just means you get lesser frame rate and lower resolution on your big screen TV. Don't get me wrong, these are important to enjoying a game too, but compared to what a game on the Game Boy Advance or 3DS looked like and could do, gaming on the Switch is kind of a bit different when you get into those kind of power crunches. Because of that, people are now enjoying hybrid gaming on the go when they want something more than mobile gaming. And if you're gaming on a console, you're going to choose the Nintendo Switch and soon the Switch 2. If you're on the PC side, then you'll probably get the Steam Deck Either way, you're just going to take the games with you. With the Steam Deck, you save the games through the cloud and put them on the deck that way, and when you get home, you can easily transfer them to your PC. With the Nintendo Switch, you just take it out of the dock and put it back into the dock, and it's so much easier than actually having a real handheld. So in the end, what killed these handhelds was actually hybrid gaming and the graphical bottleneck that caused these hybrid game systems to come in is what actually killed. And in the end, I can say it's actually a better experience because, well, we want our games on the go. It's better to actually be able to easily put them in, take them on the go, come back without having to worry about being different versions or doing any compromises. So hybrid gaming is actually one of the best things that actually happened to gaming in the last 10 or 15 years. So, why did RG85 make a video about it? Why are people like me kinda nostalgic for these handheld gamings? Why do I even keep my 3DS and even buy new software for it? Well, there is one huge disadvantage when it comes to hybrid gaming. Remember what I said about the fact that the handheld gaming was always a console generation or two behind? That was great for those middleweight games that were better off sticking to 2D games or games that didn't need a super huge budget and the development time it takes to make a modern AAA game. Because of that, we got games like Castlevania and Mega Man to live on for another decade longer than they would if these handhelds never existed. We also got to enjoy things like having yearly entries into the Kingdom Hearts franchise because Square Enix could get developers to make these games super cheap while overseeing the quality. Now, granted, you do still have the indie games, and there's always the idea of making a cheap throwaway game with the idea that it's a cheap throwaway game. But a lot of publishers want to try to maximize everything so they can maximize the profit. And because of that, those cheap games that developers and publishers would use on the handheld to make money to pay for their more expensive console games aren't there. And I think that's one of the things that is causing some of the problems in the gaming industry. Not the only one, going back to Neptunia's Sisters versus Sisters, which I think Idea Factory knocked it out of the park with their trendy phenomenon, and I do hope I get to do a video on that, because I think people who played and criticized the game stories for being stupid don't quite understand what Idea Factory was criticizing and why it was so clever, so I hope to do a video on that someday too. Anyways, my name's Tommy the Game Master. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Hope to see you later. Bye.